Hello, everyone. I'm Ali Aslan, presenter and journalist, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this ITF in Focus session titled Financing Clean Transport in Emerging Economies. We all know the development of low-carbon transport systems is a major task that requires significant investments and leadership. So in this session, we will bring together decision makers from ITF partner countries in the Decarbonizing Transport in Emerging Economies, DTEE, and the NDC Initiative for Asia, NDC-TIA projects, as well as representatives from finance institutions. The DTEE and the NDC-TIA projects are funded by the International Climate Initiative of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, and therefore it is my great pleasure to now hand over as a kickoff to Anita Breyer, who is the Director General for Emission Control, Safety and Installations, Transport, Chemical Safety and Environmental Health at the German Ministry for the Environment, to tell us about the key priorities of the International Climate Initiative. Anita, wonderful to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Ali. First of all, dear participants, dear colleagues of the International Transport Forum, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all at this virtual focus session, Funding Clean Transport in Emerging Economies. As we know, climate change is progressing and natural disasters are pestering our planet. We see the record-breaking, ever-increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere and the negative impacts of the climate change that are felt all around the planet. To meet the 2050 Paris climate commitments, there is no time to waste. At the same time, the current corona pandemic poses enormous challenges for all of us. People fear for their own health as well as that of their families and friends, and are deprived of their economic livelihood by the effects of the crisis. Companies and entire economies are threatened in their economic existence. The current situation shows clearly, in a globalized world, we are all together responsible for our common well-being as well as our common future. Therefore, we consider our global responsibility to tackle climate change together with our partners all over the world as very important. Although it might appear that under the light of the pandemic, tackling the impacts of climate change cannot be on the same board, we see it as crucial that the solutions to both challenges must go hand in hand. Green and climate-oriented recovery offers this opportunity. The sustainable design of recovery measures will ensure swift economic recovery and at the same time stimulate the long-term transformation of the economy and society towards more climate and environmental protection. Already since 2008, the International Climate Initiative, ICI as we call it, of the BMU has been financing climate and biodiversity projects in developing countries and emerging economies. As an immediate response to the corona crisis, BMU has made available significant additional ad hoc funding of 68 million euro via the International Climate Initiative, ICI. The measures focus on supporting partner countries and protecting their nature reserves and biodiversity hotspots, and on financing green economic recovery measures. Let me further highlight the importance of the transport sector for the achievement of the goals of the Paris Agreement. Since the transport sector contributes approximately 1/4 of all energy-related carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere, the ICI has a remarkable and growing portfolio of projects concerning sustainable mobility. At the moment, there are 17 projects ongoing globally with a total funding of about 180.5 million euros, supporting 22 countries in the transformation of their transport systems. 4 further projects with a total funding volume of 16.3 million euro are planned. Typically, in emerging economies, explosive economic growth and urbanization have led to an increase in transport demand and intensification of motorization. This trend has led to rising GHG emissions as well as severe air pollution. Transport sector emissions in the future will most likely further grow at even faster rates than emissions from other sectors. But just as we agreed, or we are determined to decouple economic growth from energy use and CO2 emissions, we need also decouple mobility services from CO2 emissions. Consequently, in order to decarbonize transport, immediate, effective, and sustained mitigation policies and measures need to be implemented. This is crucial to reach our common climate protection goals, with co-benefits in many areas, such as clean air in cities. Therefore, the project for decarbonizing transport in emerging economies, DTEE, implemented in Argentina, India, Azerbaijan, and Morocco, as well as the NDC Transport Initiative for Asia, a joint project with our partners in India, China, Vietnam, are of particular importance to us. Together, we want to promote a comprehensive approach on decarbonizing transport. That means developing a coherent strategy of effective policies that are coordinated among various sector ministries, civil society, and the private sector. I am very pleased to express that with these projects, we are building on our excellent cooperation to date with our partners in Argentina, India, Azerbaijan, and Morocco, China, and Vietnam, and are looking forward to jointly develop measures to achieve our climate protection goals in the transport sector. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, especially ITF, and all the organizations involved, without which these important projects would not be possible. I believe that to address the current global situation, it is crucial to show solidarity and to support our partners as effectively as possible. I look forward to further cooperation. For now, I wish you all interesting discussions, and I hope, more importantly at this point, stay healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita Breyer, Director General at the German Ministry for the Environment, for those opening remarks and for highlighting the many important projects that you are supporting. You've already mentioned a couple of countries such as India and Argentina. We have representatives from those two countries whom we will hear from in just a moment. But first, let me turn to the ITF's very own Jari Kaufila. He's the head of the Secretary General's office and head of division of quantitative policy analysis and foresight at the International Transport Forum, who will take it from here, pick up from where Anita left off, and provide us with an overview of some of the projects that have already been mentioned. Jari, delighted to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the introduction. And dear colleagues, good day from Leipzig. Actually, I have the pleasure to be here today for the second week of our annual summit and join this session from the region and the city where we normally host our annual summit. Before I give you a quick overview of the ITF projects on decarbonizing transport in emerging economies, I also want to give you some context to the discussions based on insights of our ITF Transport Outlook that was launched at the beginning of our summit, ITF Summit last Monday. So looking at the challenges, starting off with the transport demand. Under our baseline scenario, the current policy scenario, demand for passenger travel and freight transport will more than double from 2015 to 2050. Much of this growth is driven by population growth and increasing prosperity in emerging economies, especially taking place in emerging economies. What this means is that even if all the announced transport policies are put in place, the transport emissions will grow 16% by 2050. So it is clear that we need to raise ambition to reverse the CO2 emission growth. This graph you see here shows clearly that our current efforts are not enough to hit the CO2 reduction targets needed to be compatible with the limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But on a positive note, we have identified a more ambitious pathway that allows us to meet these targets. If we further front load and further leverage the opportunities during the pandemic recovery and related stimulus packages, that offers us a chance to meet our climate objectives sooner and with more certainty. And that is our Reshape Plus scenario. Now to the projects, which are aimed to really help a set of countries to raise ambition and to get on that Reshape Plus pathway that would allow us to meet global climate goals. These projects are some of the biggest ITF projects that we have ongoing in emerging economies. Our moderator mentioned already the projects. In the DTEE project, we work with India, Azerbaijan, Morocco, and Argentina. And in the NDC-TIA project, we work with India, Vietnam, and China. Although for ITF, we are mainly involved in the India component of that project. We have in both projects great project partners, which you can also see in the slide, and obviously we could not do this work by ourselves. Both projects are funded by the International Climate Initiative of the BMU, as mentioned, and on behalf of all of our project partners, project countries, as well as ITF, I want to thank the BMU to have made these projects possible. Both of the projects follow a very similar approach. First, we identify feasible pathways for the countries based on quantitative evidence. Second, we provide technical and policy support. And we make the data and tools available for stakeholders to test scenarios and test those pathways in a transparent way. In addition, we want to support the dialogue through multi-stakeholder platforms across the sectors. And of course, importantly, disseminate findings and encourage learning, not at the country level alone, but at the regional and global level, sharing this knowledge with the global transport community. Our ambitious goal is to have all this done by 2024. We are in good track. We have already held kickoff missions and published Decarbonizing Transport, Charting the Way Forward, a report for each of our partner countries. And these all reports are available on ITF website. So please feel free and go have a look at these very important documents. We are currently developing analytical tools for each country to help identify those pathways for decarbonization. And we will further prepare technical reports, organize stakeholder events over the next years, and really hopefully in person very soon. So today, our question today is, how do we create a transport system that is more sustainable and equitable? And more specifically, I really look forward hearing from our excellent panel today, distinguished speakers. What are the challenges do your countries face in accessing financing for the climate actions and also for economic recovery after the pandemic? What are potentially the most desired solutions that require that access to funding and financing? And how can global finance bodies help on that? And of course, from our side at the ITF, we would very much like to hear how can we help throughout these projects or otherwise in those objectives that you have. So thank you very much. I now turn to the moderator back to introduce our distinguished panel, and I really look forward to discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jari, for this very essential and helpful overview. And indeed, we will now dive right into a panel discussion with esteemed speakers who will discuss the very specific challenges in decarbonizing transport in their economies. Delighted to be joined by Diwakar Anupam Mittal. He's a policy professional at NITI Aayog, the National Institution for Transforming India. Also delighted to be joined by Rodrigo Rodriguez Tornquist. He's the Secretary of Climate Change, the Sustainable Development and Innovation at the Argentinian Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Very warm welcome to Maria Neto, who's the Principal Financial Market Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. And last but certainly not least, delighted to be joined by Supi Teravanintorn. She's a Director General in the Infrastructure Investment Department at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Welcome to you all, and let's dive right in. Jari was kind enough to give some food for thought and some of the questions that we will raise in this discussion. Diwakar, let me forward one of those questions directly to you, namely, how can finance institutions, since we're having a nice mix of country representatives and finance institutions present here during this session, how can finance institutions support your country, support India's transport climate actions?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. And a very warm good afternoon to all the esteemed panel members which are present today. It is my pleasure to be joining you all for the 2021 ITF Summit. I'm very happy to work with the work that has been done so far under Decarbonizing Transport in Emerging Economies initiative of the International Transport Forum, as well as NDC Transport Initiatives in Asia project, both of which are being coordinated by NITI Aayog in India. India is primarily one of the very few countries on track to meet our Paris Pact agreement, the Paris target, and we have achieved 21% of our pledge to reduce emissions intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030. In fact, we are just 2% short on our 2030 target of 40% installed non-fossil fuel electric capacity. We have to understand that emissions mainly stem from road transport, followed by rail and domestic aviation, 90% of which is being contributed by road transport. Our current transport action plans are pivoted around fostering sustainable, clean, connected, cutting edge, and shared mobility solutions, which will define the future of mobility in our country. Gradual electrification of all road transport vehicle fleets, as well as railway services in India, holds the key to decarbonizing transport sectors. Indian Railways is envisaged to be a net zero emitter by 2030. Domestically, strong financial support and timely policy interventions from the government have played a crucial role in accelerating the country's transport climate action plans. We have been emphasizing on green finance as early as 2007. Moreover, we launched 2 phases of faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid electric vehicle, a FAME scheme in 2015 and 2019 respectively, to enhance the flow of credit, reducing the upfront purchase price of all vehicles, and developing necessary infrastructure for powering clean vehicles. We also recently announced our production-linked incentive scheme on advanced cell chemistry battery storage for achieving manufacturing capacity of 50 gigawatt hours of ACC and 5 gigawatt hour of niche ACC with an outlay of $2.5 million. As we speak of the past, international bilateral funding was the biggest contributor to the development of metro rail projects, with their combined investment adding up to almost $1.8 billion in debt. Delhi and Mumbai rail projects were the largest recipients of these funds. continued. So I strongly believe that continued support of financial institutions in public transport projects, infrastructural development, and electrification of road transport will play an imperative role in the success of transport climate action plans. India, there's been a lot of work and improvement in the public awareness and financing options. There's still work that needs to be done in terms of lowering the borrowing cost, environmental compliance claims, green loan definitions, and challenges of maturity mismatches between long-term green investments and relatively short-term interest of the investors. The financial institutions also need to devise innovative procurement and leasing initiatives that lead to early deployment and bring in, and help us define the techno-economic viability of EVs, as well as help us increase the supply chain investment. It is an equation that has to be looked from the lens of, while we're supporting the demand, we also need to ensure that we have enough supply domestically. The pandemic has offered an opportunity to all the stakeholders to rethink the policies and financial and operational strategies that have been adopted so far, which will help us espouse an approach that is more environmentally sustainable in the long run. Green finance is definitely an important means that can facilitate such a shift towards sustainable economic growth. Thank you. Thank you, Ali. And that is India's progress and take as of now in terms of the role that financial institutions play in our transport climate action plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diwakar, for providing an overview of the challenges that you are facing in India, but the very important work that India has also made up until then. Let me pose the same question to Rodrigo from the Argentinian Ministry of Environment. Rodrigo, same question to you. How can finance institutions support your country, support Argentina's transport climate actions? And are there any particular challenges that you see in accessing required funding?
Thank you, Ali. And thanks to the ITF team for having me here. It's an honor to participate on this panel. Let me share some framework notes and thoughts regarding financing. I think that the only certainty we have is uncertainty. That's why innovation is the best approach for humankind to face the challenges coming in the near and long-term future. The economic recession produced by COVID-19 leads to a global inflationary process and economic instability. It also generates a systemic increase of external debt risk. As informed by UNDP last January, 72 low and middle income countries face debt problems, putting about 600 billion in payments at risk from 2021 to 2025. The world is now facing not only a sanitary crisis, but above all, a socio-economic one. According to the World Bank, the pandemic has pushed 100 million people into extreme poverty only in 2020. And the latest data from IMF indicates us that global gross domestic product fell by 3.3% in 2020. This situation is also leading to increasing geopolitical tension. So the whole situation is complex. In terms of climate finance, we have an elephant in the room and we don't know how to deal with that. There's a relevant issue with the pre-2020 pledges. According to the COP15 decision, we were supposed to allocate 30 billion to climate action from 2020 to 2012 and 100 billion from 2012 onwards. Considering the amount allocated and leveraged at the GCF, we need an extra 832 billion from the committed pledges. The economic, environmental, social, and financial crisis requires a comprehensive approach. However, we are starting a new stage in human development. Quoting the encyclical Laudato Si, we need to build upon the conviction that our planet is a homeland and that humanity is one people living in a common home. Nations should start a new dialogue on how to achieve a shared vision for a new global model oriented to an integral and sustainable development. On that regard, we understand that all the financial institutions should integrate social, environmental, and institutional metrics, considering a balanced manner for this approach. These extraordinary times and circumstances call for extraordinary measures. Of course, we need national ambition to be increased and scale up to promote the transition needed, and a new international solidarity is key for supporting the trailblazers. No public sector has the capability nor the resources required for supporting the needed transitions. Enabling conditions and the right incentives for aligning financial flows for a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable recovery will be key for this challenge. We have a unique opportunity for redesigning our financial architecture based on new bonds with nature and aim at integral human prosperity. In Argentina, we are working with an IKI project, and we are very grateful with the German government, not only for this IKI project, but also for taking the lead and keeping up the momentum during the last US administration that was a dark chapter in the climate history. However, the German government, along with others, took the lead and kept the wheel moving. Also, we are working with ITF, with the DTE project, with an extraordinary team that helped the country in capacity building and increasing the quality of the data and moving forward and supporting this important challenge we have. Argentina has put climate and environmental action at the center of its conviction and its state policy. Last December, we've increased 25.7% our NDC, and in the Leaders Summit on April 22, President Alberto Fernandez committed an extra 2% to be increased in Glasgow this year. We are absolutely committed with climate action. We are absolutely committed to make it happen, to move forward in a very concrete way. However, we understand that we need a new dialogue with international financial institutions in order to make the access to finance for making it a reality in a more concrete way, and we need to be creative since the conditions in the world and the times to come are not the optimal. So we will need to work together in a new solidarity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Indeed, cooperation, collaboration is key here. Thank you for outlining the specific challenges that your country, that Argentina, is facing in decarbonizing transport. And we heard now from two country representatives about their thoughts on how finance institutions could support their countries' transport climate actions. Let's turn towards some of those finance institutions now, and in particular, Maria Neto from the Inter-American Development Bank. Maria, you listened to what Diwakar and Rodrigo had to say. In return then, what are some of the main challenges for your institutions to funnel finance in the right direction to support countries like India, and Argentina in their quest for transport climate action?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for the Inter-American Development Bank to be here. Responding a bit to your question, we see and can talk about Latin America and the Caribbean example of Argentina in particular, more than probably the case of Asia, but our region, what we see is a huge need for investments in infrastructure. There is a gap on investments in infrastructure of at least 130 billion a year, and potential as well, very large potential on clean transport. Just for urban mobility, we see about potential of 30 billion at least a year of investments. This brings the first point of how do we bring these investments to take place? As Rodrigo mentioned, you cannot only do that with public finance. How can institutions like Inter-American Development Bank or local governments work with private sector to leverage private investments? That's the first issue. The second issue is our region is extremely bankarized. So what I mean by that is most of the financing is short-term and banking. We don't have very deep capital markets, and there is lack of long-term financing. which is extremely important for this type of investments. The second problem is when you are working with a bancarized system, mainly with commercial banks used to do, let's say, short-term financing, they also are extremely adverse to risks. And most of these projects, particularly the potential of new technology and clean projects, if we talk, for example, about urban mobility, electric vehicles, and so on, will need two things: long-term financing, because we have larger paybacks for this type of technologies, and risk-taking. So one of the key issues we see on that area is how can we work with governments to better use public resources to blend with private through, at the one hand, good projects, helping to develop good concessions, good PPP structures that can share risks and be attractive for investors, but also as financial institutions, how can we support with de-risking instruments, working more and more with guarantees, working with the local public banks. The Latin American region has strong government, public, private instruments that we can use as potential tools. We have, in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, been able to develop a number of very innovative sustainable transport programs with these banks. So how can we structure with them proper structures that can be tailored for different types of opportunities? The other area we see as well towards the future is also, although our capital markets is still very limited, we have a potential to develop the green and sustainable bond market. And we are seeing this opportunity of leveraging also investments for more funding for particularly subnationals, investments again on transport as a new opportunity. And I'm happy to talk also about that. But IDB has been supporting these issuers, cities, we have been supporting projects to structure such bonds and be able to go to markets to access also international investments for that. So I think there is one side with working with governments to help to develop the structuring of concessions, PPPs, and I think mostly in our case in Latin America, developing de-risking instruments that can attract investors and also promote long-term financing through these public banks that are operating in the region, given the lack of long-term financing, but also developing over time, hopefully, the capital markets that would be the most effective long-term financing opportunity as well, and thinking increasingly about developing the green and sustainable bond market. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for the view from the Inter-American Development Bank. Let me now turn to another finance institutions and to Supi Teravaninton, who is with the Asian Infrastructure Investments Bank. Supi, same question to you. Where do you see the main challenges for your institution to funnel the finances in the right direction to support countries out there that are looking to become greener? And is there anything you would encourage countries to consider when looking for that specific funding? I believe you are still muted.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the experience and the direction of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. I would like to say that actually we look at the challenge of the climate dimension of transport in a very, very positive lens. Because when we talk about transport, especially I focus on transport infrastructure or operation, the transport infrastructure is just a means to an end, not the end by itself. The end is how to move people and cargo and all those in a very safe and clean manner. So that is really the premise to start with. So if you talk about financier as AIIB, we are relatively new, but we set the direction very clearly that we want to finance infrastructure that is bring in safe and clean. And what we mean by that is that we already have a target. The target of by 2025, which is another 4.5 years from now only, 2025, our investment has to be, and this is the whole investment, not just transport, but the whole investment of AIB, we should be 50% contribute to climate improvement, 50%. Also, when by AIB sitting in China, and you know that China is very aggressively announced that they want to have to achieve the carbon neutral by 2060 and peak by 2030. So the peak will be by 2030 and then has to reduce to carbon neutral by 2060. Sitting in the city where the strategy of the country is moving to that direction is an added pressure that whatever we do, we need to also look into that dimension. Also want to say that AIB had already decided to launch a green climate bond. So we have the green climate bond into we launched that, and we want to use that money into all the green dimensions. So I would like to say that, of course, I don't want to repeat what Maria already talked about, that infrastructure need financing that is long term, and that's why the commercial bank and in case of in the American Development Bank, World Bank, ADB, AIB, all have the long-term financing of infrastructure, right? Compared to commercial bank that may lend 10 years, 8 years, we, for the private sector, we have 18 years or 20 years. And for public sector, we can be even longer. So the long-term financing is available. The thing is that how to get the right project. I think more, I encourage the country. I encourage country that if you want to look for financing, that is to fund projects that are safe and clean. I'm sure that all these MDB really have open door for safe and clean. So availability of funding is always there if you have good project. So I would like to say that from AIB point of view, we want to encourage a country that come into talking about investment with us, that they bring the climate dimension. We always welcome. And I want to say that we already have some project that we are working on here with some member country that we finance those replacement of fossil fuel bus to electric bus and those kind of projects. These are the direction that we encourage those country to really move into. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supi. Being mindful of the time, we have approximately 25 minutes left, and already we're having quite a number of questions coming in from audience members, which of course I'm eager to forward to you all. Let me just do a quick round of questions before we open up to audience members. A lot of food for thought already that we're getting, Diwakar. In your country, in India, is there interest in specific technology transfer or in innovation that could be supported by finance institutions or even the international community in general, building up upon what we just heard from the finance institutions?
Yes. So thank you, Ali, for another very interesting question. And definitely, India has a lot of interest in, when we talk about technology transfer or innovation further once we have had the transfer, which is further fueled by investments, a lot of investments which go into R&D. It has been established that technological advancements and economic growth, they go hand in hand. And in 2018, automotive industry spent roughly $130 billion on R&D, making a growth of about 6 to 7% from the previous year of 2017, right? Interestingly, the Indian automotive sector accounted for 40% of this global spend. So what we are looking at, and being the largest exporters of two-wheeler market, we are looking at a paradigm shift towards electric mobility, where we are looking at better performing vehicles, more battery efficient, more energy efficient vehicles. And while we are making that switch, a key subsector driving the investments in R&D at this point of time is primarily electric mobility. India has ambitious targets for renewable energy and policy decisions to establish and support the electric vehicle ecosystem. And this has been led, electric vehicle ecosystem, which has been led, and the lead sectors and investment banks I'm having some, okay. So, India's ambitious targets for renewable energy and policy decisions, you know, the electric vehicle ecosystem altogether has been the lead sector and also been an investment bed for both domestic and financial institutions, right? Ambitious emission, reduction activities, reaching our goals for Paris Agreement will require investments in negative emission technologies, such as building energy efficient batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, which will power our long freight, vehicles eventually, carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization. These are primarily the technologies that we want India to start developing and innovating on in the short-term period. While we ensue our odyssey towards a cleaner, sustainable environment, right? The economic recovery from the pandemic will continue to focus on clean energy vehicles and the industrialized CCS, CCU applications. Just to give you a background, Indian government has taken a lot of proactive measures in the past, such as setting up technology development board that aims to foster and nurture new ideas from small enterprises. We have Global Innovation and Technology Alliance that is focusing on grants for joint R&D efforts with our bilateral partners and international agencies, countries. We have a multiply grant scheme, with the sole objective of strengthening the linkages between academia and industry, so that once we have insights coming in from industry in terms of what is the next gen tech that they're looking at, we accordingly connect them with the academic institutions, and we start, we want to promulgate an ecosystem which is rich in R&D and innovation, right? So the upgradation of existing development, existing and development of new environmentally sound technologies requires a revival of risk mitigation mechanisms, to support the sector. Even though India has witnessed increment in their technology R&D projects, but while we are on this road to achieve our targets, we are looking at a bigger picture and higher targets, right? So again, the same instruments of credit enhancements, provision of risk guarantees, more investments from private sector as well as public sector is something that we are looking at in the near term. And international public finance and grants backed by strong domestic policies will obviously play a crucial role in helping us close the viability gap. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Diwakar, for the overview of innovations that the ambitious targets are concerned. We only have approximately 15-20 minutes left. There's a number of Q&As from our audience members, which I'm eager to put in. Therefore, I'd ask you to be relatively brief in outlining this question, Rodrigo, about the technology transfers or innovations that is coming out of Argentina that could be supported by finance institutions.
Thank you, Ali. I will mention just four briefly. First of all, hydrogen as an energy vector. Due to its geographical and climatic characteristics, Argentina has a high potential for renewable energy generation, since it has good radiation levels in the northwest region and appropriate winds in the Patagonian region, to which is added a significant potential in terms of hydrogen production. We are having conversations with the government of Korea, Germany, Japan, and others in order to establish energy partnerships for promoting this important and game-changing technology. Second, we are working in energy efficiency in the transport sector, and we need new technologies to encourage the development of measures by the private sector in order to reduce fuel consumption. Third, transport electrification. We need to electrify transportation with renewable energy, and it is also necessary to increase renewable power as well as strengthen the electrical transmission and distribution system. And on that regard, technologies focused in innovation in the car industry and renewable energies are very needed and welcome in my country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And in reverse, Sufi and Maria, what best case countries are you seeing out there? What's role models out there that you are dealing with? Which countries are particularly interested in financing new technologies or innovations that can drive this green transport? What are you seeing out there, Maria?
I don't know if we'll talk about a country, but what I'm seeing that's a very interesting, I would say, two trends picking up of what was said before. Electric vehicles. Electromobility is something that we are seeing in Latin America and the Caribbean as booming up, but needing serious structures to be, let's say, replicated further. No? So recently, the American Development Bank, for example, has been working with Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru in developing structures for bringing both, and it is very important, technology providers, the services for the energy provision, as well as the concessionaries and the government together to structure SPVs and schemes to finance those projects. And I think this is a very interesting example of where you can bring different players to bring programs that can be scalable. And those kinds of examples we are seeing already interest in many places in the region, including, for example, in the Caribbean, where they have a high reliance on fossil fuels. So the potential for electric vehicles in the region, particularly considering that the region has a very high matrix on renewable energy compared to other regions, is very important. The other area that I think Rodrigo is mentioning that we are giving a lot of attention to is indeed hydrogen. We see countries like Argentina, Chile, Brazil, more and more looking at the green hydrogen production. Of course, we don't have yet the technology full-fledged, therefore scaling up the transport in the day-to-day, but we believe that is one of those areas that indeed research and development and in large investments to plug in the energy and be able to actually scale up the opportunity is very important in the region. And so I would say two areas we see in the region with huge potential, some models that we're already putting together for supporting electric vehicles. And I think these models can be replicable and will be able to be scaling up more the work. And the hydrogen, which is a bit more longer term, but need high investments now, and indeed need a lot of support. And that's where MDBs like us can play a role also, with support, of course, from donors like in the case of the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Supi, which role models or best case examples are you seeing out there in your daily work? I believe you're still unmuted, but, or rather muted.
I'm sorry, I always forgot that and jump into. I can say that no doubt about how the world is moving. No doubt about everybody is looking into technology and innovation. And I cannot say only one country as a role model or something, but I can say that we certainly, I don't want to say maybe just we have a few projects that is very technology oriented and innovative oriented in China. So I can mention China, but there are many other countries as well, including some country in the GCC in Middle East. I want to say that actually right now, the technology innovation in everything we do, digitalization become really a key. It's digitalization into so many things. We are in financing transport project that is electric vehicle is everywhere, but even in construction of you can use drone to do a landscape survey. You can use drone into so many things, including we finance a port project, and the port project is so much into the high-end technology to be almost like no-man port, meaning that the whole deck you walk on to it, the vehicle is manless. You have only 7 persons instead of all the steering at the deck. So technology into our infrastructure work is become almost like a direction to go into, and I see so many dimensions of it. We invest in transport sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Supi. For the remainder of the session, let me turn to the audience questions that we have been receiving. One is from Mrs. Ren. She's the head of Industrial Cooperation of G7 Networks. and a member of the Council for Decarbonizing Transport in Asia. And she's asking, how would the panel see the necessity of establishing carbon credit and trading mechanisms in emerging countries on financing clean transport, and what role can international institutions play? Maria, is that a question that you would like to answer?
Try to answer. Of course, carbon credits can be an additional incentive. We have to be careful always about the carbon, differentiate, I think, two things. No? Carbon pricing is one thing. So the government to give some kind of price to carbon certainly is a signal to private sector that allows any investments on clean to be more profitable, right? But when we talk about carbon credits, what we have to be careful is there methodologies, will that be simple to execute and to verify? Are there buyers? No, as else we have to be careful also not to develop the model of financing or investment only based on that. That said, indeed, for many technologies that is still a long term, where the cost of investment is very high and there is still a gap of financing, certainly the opportunity of the added value from the carbon credit can be a large opportunity for scaling up those clean investments. The difficulty, of course, is always that the carbon buyer has always to be willing to buy these credits, and we need to know about what the demand is. Where can multilaterals help? I think we can help in different ways. We can help the projects to access these markets when they exist, to matching with the buyers, particularly in supporting the projects to fulfill the methodologies and demonstrate actually that they're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also helping to ensure fair pricing. Sometimes the problem of these carbon credits could also be the perception by the seller, for example, that the credit was sold at a lower level than it should be, or also understand, as I said, how this can be an additional stimulus. That said, as I was saying, I think carbon pricing is one thing, carbon credits is important, but I wouldn't base the strategy of scaling up investments in sustainable transport on carbon credits only. I would see that more as a kind of an additional incentive that can be useful, but I would not base the strategy on supporting the scale up only on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Supi, there's a question that I believe you'd be able to answer. As the financing gap in developing Asia for urban transport has been estimated by the ADB to be about $4 trillion until 2030 alone. The question is, where will these funds realistically come from?
Well, this is, I already unmute. Well, this estimate has been, I think, shifting around quite a bit. The gap, the longer term, the longer you drag on, this 4 billion can also add on. And I'm sure that after COVID-19 subside, after the pandemic subside, this number may be again increasing. If your question is where does this number come from, probably this is ADB estimate. I probably do not want to comment on my fellow institutions number, but I would like to say that doesn't matter it's 4 trillion, doesn't matter it's 3.5 trillion or what. The number is huge. The number is much more than each government can really have a deep pocket to really finance, and therefore a lot of mobilizing private sector financing become very critical. Which area the public sector should do and which area private sector should do, and what is the role of international institution in bringing in and bridging all this become more and more important. So the question is not how the number come from, whether it's accurate, it's not accurate, but the scale of the number is big enough that is encourage everybody to put effort together to work on this.
Thank you so much. Here's another question we have. In emerging economies, much of the mobility is provided by very large numbers of operators of smaller, older vehicles who are automized and have minimal financial capacity. How to bridge, that's the question, how to bridge the gulf between banks that typically invest in major capital projects and the less formal providers of transport services that serve the majority of the people. Maria, I see you nodding. That seems to be for you.
Yes, the problem independent of clean indeed is that a lot of these concessions, particularly for bus concessions, for example, public transportation, indeed we have very small concessions, and very often banks don't want to finance those institutions independently of even the technology. So that's a very good point, you know. Beyond the clean and the new technology risks, we need to consider how we can bridge the underlying problems and risks sometimes associated to these investments. And that's why I was saying a lot of the role, I think, of public is to developing de-risking instruments. You need to have guarantees. You need to work with the commercial banks, probably in some cases where it is still public banks can play a role, is to provide, let's say, a seed money for having syndicalization of resources. You need to find ways where the public sector can take the first risk, the first loss. But it's also very important to work with the governments to help that the concessions themselves and the structure of tariffs and returns is well developed over time, because partially also the problem is that very often these services providers also have very insecure, let's say, revenue and situations on where they don't have very reliable payment for their debt. So it is important, that's what I was saying, and that was the experience we had with electric vehicles, but I think it's not just about the electric vehicles, the hydrogen, the new technology brings added technology risks, but we have to deal with the underlying risks that are that if we want to scale up anyway public services for, let's say, with concessions, with PPPs, there is an important role to do with the governments to have good concessions and schemes at the one hand in terms of the quality of the projects, and at the same time to ensure that we can have proper de-risking mechanisms that can combine public and private investments in those projects. So just that in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. More questions are coming in. Rodrigo, there's one that I would like to pose to you. The question is, transport infrastructure development and maintenance usually requires a very significant amount of funding that public sector often cannot afford alone, and usually needs to leverage private investment as well through, for example, a public-private partnership. The question is, how do we make sure that the infrastructure investment projects in the emerging economies are delivering the sustainable goals while at the same time being attractive for the private sector?
Well, that's a very good question. First of all, transport infrastructure development and maintenance are two different issues. Everyone wants to invest in transport infrastructure. No one wants to invest in maintenance. That's a key issue to be considered. And that is a problem both in developing and in developed countries. Regarding how to align financial flows to sustainable development, definitely integrating a systemic approach and integrating sustainable development metrics into the feasibility of projects could be very helpful. This idea of economic feasibility and safeguards for environmental issues could have been a good approach for the 20th century. Now we need to promote common goods, and we need to integrate systemic approach and also beneficial social benefit for infrastructure development. I totally agree with Maria regarding the questions and the issues to be solved regarding climate finance. That's why this is so important to have a honest discussion on our sprint to Glasgow. Article 6 is at the core of the negotiation, and how are we going to align climate finance for these challenges is going to be key for honoring the commitments in terms of climate action.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Time really flew by here, didn't it? But I do have another question for Anita Breyer. I hope she's still with us. if she can turn on the camera and mic. There she is. Wonderful. Anita, the question, a very specific one, is how does Germany and other developed countries finance the clean transition? How can emerging economies have access to similar instruments, and how can developed countries support emerging economies in achieving that?
Yes, thank you. Good question. I think one point we have to consider is that a lot of what we have to finance is infrastructure, like the electric charging points for our electrified transportation. First of all, we have to see, even with non-climate friendly transportation, we do need investments in infrastructure. So the issue is not new. You need money to keep the transport system running and mobility services running. So basically the funding remains where it is. Second, actually we do generate quite some funds from carbon pricing, like including the ICI projects. We do have carbon pricing, and we use the money, at least part of the money, to put it back into projects that help us to get more climate friendly at home or abroad. Third issue, I think, is it depends very much on us to regulate our system well, such that for investors it becomes interesting to go into the climate-friendly investments. If you rely on, we all stick to the challenge, the Paris Challenge 2050, then in that moment, investments in something that continues to use fossil energies get less and less attractive, because, you know, at some point the states will put on laws that make any investment in fossil infrastructure unattractive. So probably I'll leave it with that.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's quite clear that this is a very timely, very pertinent, relevant topic that we've been discussing throughout the past 60 minutes, evident by the many questions that you, the audience members, have sent in. Unfortunately, of course, 60 minutes is not nearly enough to cover all aspects of such an all-encompassing, important, and intricate subject matter, but I believe I speak for all when I say that this has been an extremely informative and insightful session, which now is drawing to a close. Many thanks to Anita Breyer, Jari Kaupela, Diwakar Anupam Mittal, Rodrigo in Emerging Economies. Thank you so much for watching this ITF in Focus session. Please stay tuned, of course, there's much more to come. The next focus session, titled Decarbonizing Transport, Unlocking the Hard to Abate Sectors, will start in an hour from now. Pretty much we'll pick up probably where we left off. It'll feature many of the ITF's decarbonizing transport initiatives and its latest projects as well. Thank you so much to everyone involved, as a speaker, as an audience member. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned for the next session.